The 1980s, a decade Quentin Tarantino once dismissed as ballless, but even the harshest critic can't ignore a handful of renegade classics. Forget everything you thought you knew about 80s movies. What if I told you Tarantino, the king of cool, has his own secret playlist from the era, and it's nothing like what's on your usual best of lists? Ready to see which films he says are actually worth your time? Don't blink, because the real outlaws of cinema are about to crash the party. Breathless 1983. Start with a heist, a wild getaway, and a dose of punk rock anarchy. That's Breathless, Jim McBride's renegade remake of the French New Wave classic, and the very first movie on Tarantino's shortlist of 80s films that are actually worth your time. This isn't just any remake. This is the one Quentin Tarantino calls the coolest movie ever made. It's easy to see why. Richard Gere, all neon bravado and cocky smirks, dives headfirst into a world that feels like a comic book, a pop song, and a fever dream rolled into one. Forget Paris, this breathless tears down the streets of sun-blasted Los Angeles. Gere plays Jesse Lujack, a small-time criminal with a fixation on Silver Surfer comics and rockabilly swagger. He's running from the law and running toward Monica Valerie Kaprisky, the French student who's way out of his league but can't quite resist his reckless charm. The dialogue is pure gasoline, and the chemistry between the leads crackles with the same danger that made Tarantino fall in love with movies in the first place. Tarantino's affection for Breathless isn't just about nostalgia, it's about attitude. In his own words, the film indulges completely all my obsessions, comic books, rockabilly music, and movies. If you want to know where Quentin gets his flair for genre blending, for outlaw romance, for turning pop culture into something mythic, look no further. Breathless is the Rosetta Stone of Tarantino's cinematic language, a film that doesn't apologize for being loud, stylish, or emotionally raw. There's a certain madness to how Breathless plays out. The plot is simple on the surface, but the energy is relentless. Neon-lit motels, jukebox soundtracks, the constant threat of violence. It all feels just a step away from spinning out of control. And that's exactly the point. This is the 1980s without safety rails, a time when movies could still take big swings and dare you not to look away. Tarantino has praised Jim McBride's direction for its guts and invention, especially in a decade he often criticizes as bland and ballless. But Breathless doesn't care about fitting in. It's a cinematic dare, a movie that spits in the face of respectability and double dares you to root for a doomed anti-hero. Breathless remains a cult favorite, not because it's safe, but because it's risky. That's Tarantino's kind of movie, a shot of pure, unfiltered cinema for anyone who thinks the 80s were just about pastels and pop hits. You want cool? This is where it starts. Manhunter, 1986. If you're looking for the film that changed the color palette of crime thrillers forever, Manhunter is it. Michael Mann's 1986 adaptation of Thomas Harris's Red Dragon is, in Tarantino's eyes, a revelation, a movie that set the visual template for every cerebral thriller that came after. Before Silence of the Lambs put Hannibal Lecter on the pop culture map, there was this. A slick, haunting meditation on obsession and the darkness within, starring William Peterson as the tortured profiler Will Graham. Tarantino has never shied away from singing the praises of Manhunter, both for its look and its feel. The movie is drenched in neon, synths, and uneasy silences. The colors aren't just stylish, they're a psychological map of the characters' fractured minds. Mann pushes the boundaries of what a thriller could be, making Manhunter as much about mood as about murder. It's a blueprint for modern suspense, clinical yet intimate, and always pulsing with dread. What sets Manhunter apart, and why it's a Tarantino favorite, is the film's willingness to stare directly into the abyss. Peterson's Graham isn't just hunting a killer. He's wrestling with the parts of himself he'd rather keep locked away. Every frame pulses with that tension. Mann's camera lingers on faces, hands, the smallest details. A cigarette burn, a glance, a drop of sweat. This isn't just style for style's sake. It's a study in how danger creeps up, quietly, inevitably. Tarantino's love for Manhunter is also a love for its discipline. It's a movie that never flinches. Tom Noonan, as the monstrous Francis Dollarhide, is a force of nature, terrifying and strangely sympathetic. The procedural details are precise. The violence, when it comes, is brutal, but never gratuitous. For Tarantino, this kind of rigor is the gold standard. He's called Manhunter, an influence on his own approach to visual storytelling, controlled, moody, loaded with meaning. In a decade of crime movies that often went broad and cartoonish, Manhunter is lean, mean, and utterly adult. It doesn't chase cheap thrills. It builds a world and traps you inside. The soundtrack alone, icy synths and dissonant guitar licks, feels like a nervous breakdown you can't look away from. If you want to see the 1980s at its smartest and most stylish, this is the movie Tarantino insists you watch. Manhunter is more than a cult classic. It's a lesson in how to make every shot count. 8 Million Ways to Die, 1986. Directed by Hal Ashby and starring Jeff Bridges, Rosanna Arquette, and Andy Garcia, the film is infamous for its chaotic production and its bruised, beautiful final cut. Tarantino calls it one of the true gems of the decade, the kind of movie only a real risk-taker could love. Why does Tarantino champion this particular slice of LA noir? Because 8 Million Ways to Die is a movie with nothing left to lose. The story follows Bridges as Matt Scudder, an alcoholic ex-cop drawn into a bloody tangle of drugs, crime, and desperation. This is noir stripped of all glamour. Every character is damaged. Every deal feels like it could go sideways. Tarantino is a fan of movies that feel lived in, rough around the edges, and 8 Million is all of that and more. The legend goes that Ashby, a director known for his freewheeling style, lost control of the movie to studio meddling. The editing was a nightmare, the cast feuded with producers, and when it finally hit theaters, critics didn't know what to make of it. But Tarantino sees something different. In his view, the chaos only adds to the film's desperate energy. This isn't a polished product. It's a raw nerve, pulsing with everything that makes crime movies thrilling. What makes 8 Million Ways to Die worth watching, according to Tarantino, isn't just the story, it's the mood. Ashby's LA is both sun-drenched and seedy, a place where every promise hides a threat. Bridges, in one of his most underrated performances, gives us a hero who's more haunted than heroic. The dialogue is sharp, the action sudden, the betrayal's inevitable. For Tarantino, this movie is proof that greatness can survive even the messiest productions. Tarantino has spoken about how the actors rallied behind Ashby, how they tried to salvage the vision, and how the film's imperfections become its strengths. 8 Million Ways to Die feels dangerous because it is dangerous. Made on the edge, it leaves you unsure what's coming next. That's the kind of risk Tarantino lives for. If you're looking for a forgotten 80s crime flick with the guts to be unpredictable, start here. It's a masterclass in how style and chaos can collide and make something unforgettable. Flesh and Blood, 1985. Blood, mud, betrayal, and one of the wildest rides you'll ever take through medieval Europe. That's Paul Verhoeven's Flesh and Blood, a movie Tarantino can't stop talking about. If you thought the 80s were all about shoulder pads and synth pop, this movie will slap that idea right out of your head. Tarantino has called it one of his all-time favorites for a reason. It's the rare period piece that doesn't flinch from the ugly side of history. Set in Italy in 1501, Flesh and Blood follows a band of mercenaries, led by Rutger Hauer, in a performance that's equal parts charismatic and feral, who get double-crossed by their employer and decide to take brutal revenge. They kidnap his son, besiege a castle, and set off a chain of violence, lust, and betrayal that makes Game of Thrones look like a Sunday picnic. Tarantino is all about movies that push boundaries, and Flesh and Blood smashes right through them. What grabs Tarantino isn't just the gore or the guts, it's the honesty. Verhoeven doesn't romanticize the past. He drags you through it, mud and all. The violence is shocking, the sex is messy, and nobody comes out clean. For Tarantino, this is how you do historical drama. You get your hands dirty, you show how power warps everyone it touches, and you never pretend there's a neat moral at the end. Flesh and Blood is the anti-fairy tale, a brutal reminder that survival means compromise, and often cruelty. The film's reputation has grown over the years, partly because of champions like Tarantino, who see through its initial controversy to its wild, kinetic heart. Verhoeven's style, so gleefully provocative, so unafraid of ugliness, would later surface in hits like RoboCop and Total Recall, but it's here, in Flesh and Blood, that he truly lets loose. For Tarantino, that's the real thrill, a director with nothing to lose and a story that refuses to behave. If you're tired of costume dramas where everyone's hair is perfect and the past seems sanitized, Flesh and Blood will snap you awake. It's raw, nasty, and unforgettable, the kind of movie Tarantino insists you have to see to believe. Forget history lessons. This is what the 80s looked like when nobody was watching, and that's why it's on this list. Near Dark, 1987. If you ever wanted proof that the 80s could pull off horror and westerns at the same time, and do it with style so bold it leaves a scar, look no further than Near Dark. Kathryn Bigelow's cult classic is Tarantino's idea of a perfect genre mashup, part vampire nightmare, part outlaw saga, all adrenaline, all attitude. In an era obsessed with sequels and safe bets, Near Dark is a moonlit detour off the main highway, a film so feverish and original that Quentin Tarantino called himself the biggest fan of Near Dark and credits it as a major influence. He's even said he followed Bigelow's career ever since, always looking for that same wild magic. But what really makes Near Dark special isn't just the premise, though. Let's be real. A young cowboy who gets tangled up with a family of nomadic vampires roaming the American Southwest is about as rock and roll as a plot gets. The movie drips with atmosphere. Bigelow turns every scene into a sweaty, dreamlike haze where every shadow hides danger, and every dawn could mean oblivion. It's a film where the sunburnt, wide-open highways of the West collide with the claustrophobic terror of vampire lore. Near Dark is sunburned and moonlit all at once, soaked in dust and menace, neon signs flickering over blood-soaked motel sheets, and every character staring down the barrel of eternity. For Tarantino, who lives for movies that blend, subvert, and break genres, Near Dark is nothing less than a masterclass in not picking sides. It's a horror movie that rides like a western, a love story with fangs, and a road movie full of blood, heartbreak, and regret. There are gunfights straight out of a spaghetti western, barroom brawls turned into horror set pieces, and a sense of outcast desperation that runs through every shot. It's the kind of film that makes you ask, what if John Ford directed a vampire movie, but then handed the camera to David Lynch halfway through? The cast, meanwhile, is a who's who of 80s cult royalty. Adrian Pasdar is perfect as the lovesick drifter, just trying to make sense of a world gone mad. Lance Henriksen, all grizzled menace and haunted eyes, leads the pack as Jesse Hooker, a vampire who's seen centuries of bloodshed and carries every year on his face. But let's be honest, Bill Paxton steals the show as Severin, a vampire so wild and unpredictable, you're never sure whether to root for him or run. Together, they form a gang that's more like a doomed family, bound by blood and tragedy. Tarantino admires how Bigelow refuses to make her monsters one-note villains. Instead, she makes them sad, wild, sometimes even pitiful creatures who long for connection, even as they tear it apart. That refusal to judge, to let her characters stay broken and strange, is a big reason why Tarantino keeps returning to this film. Near Dark has guts. It's a movie that never blinks, whether it's blowing up a bar in a shower of blood, or lingering on the loneliness of its doomed characters. The practical effects are nasty and unforgettable. The standoffs are epic, and the whole thing feels like a legend you half remember from a nightmare. Here's the real kicker. Near Dark never got the blockbuster love it deserved. It wasn't a hit. But in Tarantino's eyes, that just makes it cooler. This is a movie for midnight crowds, for fans of broken heroes, outlaws, and stories that don't play by the rules. It's proof that the 80s, even at their weirdest, could still deliver movies that took risks, mixed genres, and left a mark you couldn't shake. Want to see what happens when an 80s film refuses to color inside the lines? Take it from Quentin, Near Dark is the one you have to watch. Year of the Dragon, 1985. If you think the 80s was all about empty spectacle, Year of the Dragon will set you straight fast. This is Michael Cimino at his most ferocious, no disco gloss, no easy heroes. Just a crime epic that grabs you by the collar and drags you into the sweaty, lawless underbelly of New York's Chinatown. It's the kind of movie Quentin Tarantino never stops talking about. In a decade drowning in sequels and safe bets, Year of the Dragon is the meanest punch in the gut you'll ever get from an 80s film. From the jump, Cimino makes it clear this isn't a city for the faint of heart. The camera prowls through crowded streets, neon reflections bouncing off puddles and windows, the air thick with danger. Tarantino loves this movie for exactly that reason. The relentless pace, the fearless style, the way it barrels into topics most directors wouldn't even touch. Corruption isn't just background noise here, it's the pulse. Every alley hides a secret, every handshake could be a setup, and tradition is always at war with progress, crime, and survival. The Chinatown of Year of the Dragon feels alive and dangerous, a labyrinth you may never escape. And at the film's heart, tearing through the chaos like a force of nature, is Mickey Rourke as Captain Stanley White. Tarantino has singled out Rourke's performance as one of the decade's best, brilliant, brutal, and so tightly wound you almost expect him to explode. Stanley isn't your typical cop. He's a man haunted by war, eaten alive by his own demons, and hell-bent on cleaning up Chinatown, even if it destroys him. His sense of justice is as self-destructive as it is righteous, and every scene pulses with the energy of a man who refuses to back down, no matter how much he should. The supporting cast is just as fierce. John Lone delivers a star-making turn as Joey Tai, the upstart gangster trying to outmaneuver everyone, including Stanley. Ariane, as the reporter Tracy Tzu, is caught between two worlds, her own ambitions and the brutal reality of the turf war she's covering. Nothing here is black and white. Every character has blood on their hands, and nobody escapes clean. Tarantino's favorite moment? The legendary train track shootout. He's called it one of my favorite killer movie moments, a sequence so tense you forget to breathe. It's the kind of scene that only Cimino could stage, chaotic, explosive, shot through with adrenaline and dread. But the whole movie is like that. Bullets flying, betrayals stacking up, the city itself closing in. Cimino, still smarting from the fallout of Heaven's Gate, had something to prove, and he went all in, making a movie that never lets up. What makes Year of the Dragon a true Tarantino pick isn't just its intensity, it's the refusal to play nice. This movie doesn't care if you're uncomfortable. Cimino wants you to feel every betrayal, every loss, every moment of fear and anger. It's raw, uncompromising, and, in Tarantino's view, exactly what the decade needed. A movie that spits in the face of safe filmmaking and demands your attention. Year of the Dragon isn't polite, and it isn't easy. That's why it stands out. It dares you to look away and make sure you can't. That's 80s cinema, Tarantino style. You've just seen the side of the 80s that Tarantino swears by. No gloss, no apologies, just pure cinematic guts. So, which of these rebel films would make your own must-watch list? Or did any surprise you? Hit the comments and drop your 80s essentials. Smash subscribe if you want more offbeat movie deep dives, and share this with the film fan who thinks they've seen it all. Here's a question. What decade do you think was Hollywood's real Wild West?